All right, let's get right into it. A single social media post from Nigerian politician Peter Obi pretty much set the internet on fire recently. And you know what? It all comes down to one very large number. So we're going to break down what that number actually means and why it kicked off such a massive conversation about Nigeria's past, its present, and where it's headed. $9 million. So what does a number like that even mean? I mean, you'd hope it's for something big, right? Like a huge new infrastructure project, maybe a massive boost to the education system. Well, the reality, at least according to Peter Obi, is a whole lot more controversial. This number, this $9 million, became the absolute heart of a major critique against the government. And here it is. This is the post that lit the fuse. On January 16th, Peter Obi put this out there, and he did not hold back. He's basically accusing the country's leaders of caring more about propaganda and their image than about the actual people they're supposed to serve. His whole point was that this $9 million wasn't some investment in Nigeria, it was an investment in polishing Nigeria's image, and that it came at the expense of its own citizens. So, where did the money actually go?
Okay, so get this. The $9 million was for a contract with a U.S. lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. called the DCI Group. And their job? To basically polish Nigeria's international image and influence U.S. policymakers on stuff like security and religious freedom. Now, the government's argument, you could imagine, is that managing Nigeria's reputation on the world stage is super important for things like attracting investment. But for Peter Obi and his supporters, no way. They see it as a staggering waste of money, just a PR campaign to try and hide some really deep, serious problems back home.
But look, this is bigger than just one contract. For Obi, this spending is just a symptom of a much, much larger problem that's been going on for decades. And that problem is a nation that, he argues, has been completely left in the dust by its peers. To really get what he means, we have to look at a key metric.
And that metric is something called the Human Development Index, or HDI for short. It's a pretty standard way the UN measures a country's progress. It's not just about money. It looks at a country's health, its education, and its standard of living. Life expectancy, how many years people go to school, that sort of thing. It's supposed to give you a quick snapshot of the quality of life. And for Nigeria, well, that picture has been pretty worrying for a long, long time.
Okay, so let's just wind the clock back to 1990 for a second. Back then, Nigeria and China were, well, they were surprisingly similar in terms of development. China's HDI was just a tiny bit higher. But, and this is the wild part, Nigeria's GDP per person was actually way higher. They were basically peers, starting from almost the same point.
Okay, now let's fast forward about 35 years to today. The difference is just stunning. It's night and day. China has completely skyrocketed into the high development category. Its income per person has exploded. And Nigeria? Well, it's barely moved. It's still stuck down in that low HDI category.
And this chart just lays it all out, doesn't it? When you put Nigeria right next to countries that used to be its peers, like Vietnam and China, you can see just how massive the gap has become. I mean, we're not talking about a small difference here. This represents a completely different reality, a totally different quality of life for the average person living in these countries. So, what on earth happened?
Well, according to Peter Obi, this didn't just happen by accident. It wasn't destiny, and it certainly wasn't because of a lack of resources. For him, it comes down to one thing: leadership. Or rather, a failure of leadership. He argues that while other countries were making smart, strategic choices, investing in their people, in education, in infrastructure, Nigeria's leaders were, well, they were squandering those same opportunities. And this is where it gets really serious. Because that stagnation, that gap you see in the numbers, that isn't just some abstract economic thing you read about in a report. It has a real, devastating human cost. And you see it most clearly when you look at the nation's healthcare.
54.9 years. That's the average life expectancy in Nigeria. And according to the data Obi is pointing to, that is the lowest in the entire world. Just let that sink in for a second. It's lower than countries that are literally in the middle of a war.
And honestly, the story gets even more grim from there. 1,047. That's Nigeria's maternal mortality rate. That means for every 100,000 babies born, over 1,000 mothers die. It's an absolutely staggering number, and it means giving birth is one of the most dangerous things a woman can possibly do in the country. To really bring it home, Nigeria has the second highest number of maternal deaths of any country on the planet. And what that breaks down to is one woman dying from childbirth about every 7 minutes. Every 7 minutes. I mean, that's not just a statistic, that's a crisis by any definition.
And that brings us full circle, right back to that $9 million. Because the question becomes, how can you possibly justify spending millions on international PR when your healthcare system is in a state of absolute emergency? This is where Obi's argument really hits home.
So let's just look at the numbers side by side. The money spent on that U.S. lobbying contract, about 14 billion naira, is more than the entire combined capital budget for 6 of the country's most important teaching hospitals for the whole year of 2024. And these aren't just any hospitals. These are the top-tier institutions meant to serve millions of people.
And we're talking about specific major hospitals here. We've got the University College Hospital in Ibadan, the Ahmadu Bello University Teaching Hospital in Zaria, one from each geopolitical zone. The money they have for the entire year, for essential equipment, for fixing up the buildings, for any upgrades, all of that combined is less than what was spent on this one PR contract. It's just a crystal clear picture of the nation's priorities.
So, what's the solution? Where does Nigeria go from here? For Peter Obi, this whole debate, it all just boils down to a really fundamental choice about priorities, about what kind of country Nigeria actually wants to be.
And his core message is this: the problem isn't a lack of money. I mean, Nigeria is a nation rich in resources. But the problem, he says, is a lack of leadership, a lack of will to actually put that money where it matters most, into the things that save lives and build a real future for its people.
So in the end, this whole debate about $9 million is really about something much, much bigger. Peter Obi's argument is that nations aren't built by chance or miracles. They're built by choices, deliberate, conscious choices. So the final question isn't really if Nigeria can change. It's whether its leaders and its people